and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
USA, I'm Andy Hum. Hello? What happened to Ann? Did we lose her?
There we go.
Hi, Ann.
Hi.
In the headlines this week, we're going to start with some good news. A federal judge has blocked at the last minute Trump's rule allowing anti-transgender discrimination in healthcare from going into effect.
I guess I dropped out for a second there. I'm Ann Northrup. We're going to go over the diversity that the Democrats have put front and center at their national convention.
Alex Morse is fighting an anti-gay smear in his campaign to unseat US Representative Richie Neal in Massachusetts, a smear that Democratic leaders in the state colluded with.
Historic wins for Black LGBT candidates in Florida and LGBT candidates nationwide.
Under pressure, the New York, New Jersey police have reopened...
Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, New Jersey. Police have reopened an investigation into the suspicious death of trans woman Ashley Moore.
Sorry to interrupt. You said New York, New Jersey. A Black Pride March honoring Bayard Rustin and Marsha P. Johnson is set for New York on Monday.
It actually is in New York, New Jersey. It's called West New York.
That's why I corrected you.
Okay. A man in the United Kingdom got a prison sentence because he brutally whipped his LGBT son with a cable.
But we are going to start with our guest tonight, veteran AIDS activist Mark Milano, who is celebrating his victory in a federal lawsuit against a doctor who refused him treatment and others because they are living with HIV. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. Congratulations.
We appreciate everything you did to pursue this case.
So this only took 5 years. Take us back to the beginning. What happened?
It's actually 6 years. I've been living with AIDS since 1982. I was diagnosed, and I was diagnosed with cancer, anal cancer, in 2007. And I went through treatment. It was really rough. I almost died. And then I had the cancer metastasize to my right lung, to my left lung, to my kidneys. It was really touch and go. But I got over it. I mean, I was well. And in 2014, I got a PET scan back, and it found no cancer. And this was 4 years with no cancer. So I said, maybe I'm going to beat this. And I also noticed that the PET scan said, gynecomastia unchanged. And I knew what gynecomastia was. That's a condition where men get fat in the breasts, in the chest. So you almost have breasts rather than a chest. And it's very disfiguring and unsightly. And it's a problem for many men, especially people with HIV and cancer survivors. So I Googled and I found advanced cosmetics, and I went in for a consultation.
This is Dr. Emmanuel Asare. We have a picture of
Emmanuel Asare, yeah. He's in Midtown. And they have you a whole long form to fill out, which I just left blank because my medical history is so complicated. I prefer to talk about it in person. And I went in the room and he examined me and he said, yeah, this is definitely gynecomastia, which, by the way, is only repairable through surgery. You can diet and exercise like crazy, which I did. It will not go away. It has to be sucked out. That's the only option. He said, well, we can fix this. And I said, great. And then I said, so what caused this? Is it because I lost so much weight? I lost 30 pounds when I had cancer and I gained it back too quickly. And he said, well, we really don't know what causes gynecomastia. I said, well, could it be one of my HIV drugs? And at that moment, everything changed. And he sat down and he said, "You didn't check HIV in your intake form." And I said, "No, I prefer to say that in person." And then he stopped and he closed the book and he looked at me very seriously and he said, "I should inform you, it is our policy to not perform any procedures on any patients with the human immunodeficiency virus." And in 2014, you have to understand how shocked I was, right? This was the first time any medical provider had said, "I won't see you because you have HIV." And I lived through the 80s, right? And I never got this before. So it was like a punch in the gut. I didn't know what to do. And I just said, "That's illegal." He said, "No, it's not." I asked my lawyer. He said, "Because this is a private practice, it's elective surgery, I can turn away anybody I want." And I said, "That makes no difference. You can't turn someone away just because they have HIV. You can't have a policy that says that." He said,
You're covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was established early on. There were cases about this that went to court in the early 1980s, like when Joe Sonovan, the building that he was doing service for people with HIV, they wanted to throw him out because he was helping people with HIV.
Yeah, so this is all I thought resolved years ago, and here it was in my face. And I said, "I'm going to report you." He said, "Be my guest, tell whoever you want, I'm a doctor." It was very arrogant and dismissive. And I said, "Fine." And I walked out, and I got to tell you, you both know me. You know that I am a pretty hardened, tough AIDS activist, right? I have shouted down George Bush and Donald Trump and many government officials, and I do that. But I was on the verge of tears. I left the office just feeling awful. And I went to work, and a friend had a contact at the Department of Justice. And I called the DOJ. I told him what happened. He said, "This definitely sounds illegal. File a complaint immediately."
So
and I did.
This was picked up by none other than Preet Bharara.
Yes.
He was for the Southern District for the Department of Justice.
And Eric Holder, signature was on the thing too, which was great. So those people, Preet Bharara and Eric Holder, sent him a letter saying, "We've received a complaint. We want to come and discuss this with you." And what did he do? He ignored it completely. So that was in September. They mailed him again in November, and he once again ignored it completely. I'm like, this is crazy. So finally, they contacted him saying, "We're going to file a lawsuit." So then he finally wrote a letter himself saying, "Yes, I don't do anything on people with HIV, just like I don't do anything on people with cancer or diabetes or heart disease." So he admitted to it, right? Just crazy. So normally these cases you settle. The doctor says, "Oops, I'm sorry. I won't do this ever again. I'll pay a fine." It's done, right? Dr. Emmanuel Asari dug his heels in and refused to settle. And so in May of 2015, the DOJ went to court. I had to get my own lawyers. So luckily, the HIV Law Project at Housing Works took on the case, and a private law firm, Emery Shelley Brinkerhoff, took it on, both with no charge to me.
You had a couple of co-plaintiffs. How did they show up in this?
So what happened is the DOJ finally went through all of Asari's files and found out that, first of all, I found out by looking at online reviews, I found 5 or 6 other people with HIV saying they had done the same thing to him.
Wow.
They never admitted it. They found more in his files, and they also found out, get this, he was testing every single patient for HIV without their knowledge or consent. Just testing them. And if they tested positive, he would tell them, "I'm not going to see you." So that's illegal too, right? You have to get consent to perform an HIV test.
Of course.
So as they went through the files, they found people and they asked them, "Would you be willing to testify in court?" And two men agreed to do that. And what was fascinating is that I had never spoken to them. One of them got up and said the exact same words that I said. He said, "It is our policy to never perform." So this is obviously a rehearsed thing that he used with all his HIV positive patients. In my case, the judge said, this is so obviously against the law that we got a summary judgment, which is that we don't even have to go to court. It's so obvious that you broke the law. We're finding you guilty of this, right? But then we had to go to court for the other two and for the damages. So I got to finally see him in court. A lot of my friends came to the trial, which was great. I testified. And at the end, I said, "Can I say something to Dr. Asari?" And they, of course, objected. And the judge said, "I'll allow it." So I looked him in the face. First time I had really spoken to him. First time I had spoken to him. And I said, "Dr. Asari, what you did was wrong. It was incredibly hurtful, stigmatizing. It caused me tremendous anxiety and stress. And it was medically wrong. It was legally wrong. And it was morally wrong. And you should never do this to anybody again." And that was nice to be able to look him in the eye and, say that to him.
Yeah.
So that was in 2017. And we had to wait until last week to finally get the decision. And we got a couple of things. He had claimed that the reason he wouldn't treat people with HIV is that his anesthesiology medicines interacted with HIV medicines, which, by the way, is not true. But even if it were true, the judge said, you can't use an argument like that because you didn't even ask them what meds they were on. You didn't do anything. You just said, I turn away anybody with HIV. So, that was an important thing, that you can't have this broad policy. And then secondly, the kind of emotional damages we went through were not ones that had a medical diagnosis. I didn't bring in a doctor to testify that I was medically diagnosed with PTSD or something like that. All three of us had what are called garden variety psychological distress. That's the legal term. And they were arguing that garden variety stress, you should only get a couple $1,000s for that. It's not a big deal. And the judge said for all three of us, no. Even though they had no doctors testifying, it's clear from their testimony that they all went through psychological, emotional, lost sleep. I had nightmares about Dr. Asari. I lost time at work. Based upon the stress that we went through, she awarded each of us $125,000 in damages, which is, of significant damage that is important legally. So, it was very gratifying to see that she realized how egregious what he did was and felt that we should be compensated.
And he's been ordered not to test, of course, anybody without their consent in the future, and has to comply with the ADA. How do you check up on that? Of course, you're not going to be going back to him. I hope you did get treated in the meantime.
I actually didn't, because I was so scared that I would go. I heard from a lot of people in the last 6 years that this is common among cosmetic surgeons, that a lot of cosmetic surgeons don't treat people with HIV. And I didn't want to go to another one and have this same thing happen and have to report him again, right? I mean, this is enough already. So I actually haven't moved forward with it. And I also kind of wanted this to be resolved before I did. Maybe now that it's resolved, I will finally do it. But
and your case was seen through, even in the Trump Justice Department. They didn't drop it. So
yeah, I was relieved about that. I was worried about that, but they didn't. They continue. Maybe they put so much work into it already. They didn't want to stop it. But I didn't do this. Anne, did you want to say something?
Well, the judge talked about in her decision, and you've talked about your emotional reaction to all of this. But talk in a little more depth about the stigma that you felt for the first time, the actual discrimination, not just nightmares, but the real feelings of low self-esteem or whatever that this gave you.
Yeah, so like every person with HIV, I've experienced stigma, largely from HIV negative gay men. I've had a number of gay men who, when they found out I was HIV, not only didn't want to have anything to do with me, but treated me horribly. And the stigma between HIV negative and HIV positive gay men is actually kind of getting worse. Remember in the 80s when we all were in this fight together, positive and negative? Mm-hmm. And now it's two camps. HIV negative men treat HIV positive gay men really terribly these days. So I've experienced that, but I never experienced it from a provider of any kind before July of 2014. And that was different because if it's another gay man, I can say, well, that's ignorance and that's fear and that's lack of education, right? But providers are supposed to be educated. I look to providers kind of as a salve against the discrimination I face from regular people who don't understand this stuff. And a provider is supposed to be a refuge, right? That's somebody who is there. They're a healer. That's their job, which is to help you, not to hurt you. So it was particularly, and his attitude was just so dismissive. It was basically, get out of my office, your disease, I don't want to have anything to do with you. There was no question about what's your CD4 count, what's your viral load, how is your health in general. There was nothing. It was like, you have HIV, I'm not touching you. And it really hurt in a way that surprised me, that I went over and over and over. I've replayed that scene in my head hundreds of times because it wasn't just what he did. It was the fact that he was a doctor, and it was the fact that he treated me as though I was unworthy, as though I shouldn't have had the gall to go in and ask for cosmetic surgery.
Well, so you work in the field, and as you say, you hear from a lot of other people that this happens to a lot of people, especially from cosmetic surgeons, but perhaps from others too. What would you say to people living with HIV who require treatment and run into this kind of reaction from doctors?
The really shocking thing to me as the 6 years have gone on is how many people I've spoken to who experience this, largely from cosmetic surgeons, because that's my case, and never reported it. You know, I don't know if there's a sense like he's a doctor, he knows what the law is, or I'm embarrassed that I'm seeking cosmetic surgery, which is kind of embarrassing, right? This guy did it, who knows to how many people? We don't know, right? But nobody ever reported him. Well, we know that he never did anything on any patients with HIV ever. So we know he was turning them away.
Well, it sounds like the professional association should be doing some education or forced to do some education, and that the Justice Department and local human rights commissions and state human rights commissions ought to be sending testers in there until this problem gets cleared up.
I agree. But the main thing is people with HIV should know this is illegal. And if it happens to you, report it. The US Department of Justice, of course, I don't know how they are now, but in 2014, they were great. But there's the New York City Human Rights Commission. You can go to Housing Works, HIV Law Project. I would think the best bet in New York would be to go to Housing Works. They will definitely tell you, do you have a case and where should you file the complaint? You know, they'll give you, whether they take the case or not, they will tell you what you should do. But the main thing is don't be silent. You know, call these people out. And Ann and Andy, you know that he definitely crossed the wrong person, right? I mean,
yes, we do know that. As I told you, tenacity is your middle name.
Right. I'm not the kind of guy who would ever take this laying down. And but that saddens me, you know, that other people with HIV aren't empowered enough to say, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to stand up against this, and I deserve better. Because we have as much a right to cosmetic surgery as anybody else, because this disease and the drugs and cancer treatment, they do things to your body. And if I have breasts, why shouldn't I be allowed to correct that, right? I mean, just because I have HIV. So, people with HIV, if you ever face discrimination of any kind, file a complaint. The AIDS Institute has a whole department, which I used to work for, that takes confidentiality complaints. If somebody breaches your HIV confidentiality, there are places that you can file complaints. So stand up for yourselves. Don't let these doctors get away with this.
It's a great message, but as you know, we still these days get people telling us how brave we were to be out in the streets and to fight against the government about HIV issues all along. People are afraid to speak up, and especially if they are living with HIV, they are still afraid of the stigma. You described the divide. People are afraid.
It's true, and I have to say, kudos to my two co-plaintiffs, because they were both very much concerned and about that and testified anyways. And they both testified anonymously. Their names have not been released. And one of them was actually risking his career by testifying. And so the DOJ stood up and said, we would like to redact his name from the records because this could really damage him. And Asari's lawyer got up and said, we already have all these transcripts. It's too much work. We can't take his name out. And I'm like, really? This poor guy, you're going to ruin his career because of this? And the DOJ said, we'll do all the redacting ourselves, if that's okay with you. And so if you look at the, and you said you read the judgment, their names don't appear, right? They're just
only initials, and I don't know whether they're real initials. The fact that they could testify anonymously and not be identified is a great point to reassure people that they can raise these complaints without jeopardizing their confidentiality on any basis. And I also, I'm sure there are people who are wondering about, well, should doctors be forced to treat people with HIV? There are a lot of people who are still out there ignorant. And one thing I liked was the judge talking about universal precautions and the fact that that is an established procedure, and we can all protect ourselves in whatever venue with universal precautions.
Well, and the other important thing to remember is that in almost 40 years now, over 40 years, of course, of HIV being out there, right? There has never been a single healthcare provider who got HIV. There's never been a surgeon. There's never been a doctor. Nobody has ever gotten HIV from a person with HIV. And especially now, if Dr. Asari had asked, I would have told him my viral load is undetectable, which means it's impossible for me to infect him. So there was no risk to him at all.
Maybe 2 needle sticks?
Yeah, yes, you're right. There have been some needle stick incidents, yeah. But I'm saying in terms of doing a medical procedure, no surgeon has ever got HIV from that. And especially nowadays that, I can see a surgeon saying, before I operate, I want to make sure your viral load's undetectable. That's reasonable, right? The other thing, by the way, he didn't do is he did no reasonable accommodation. He could have referred me to other physicians in his practice. He could have, if he was concerned about his anesthesiology drugs, he could have used different drugs. He could have brought in a different anesthesiologist. There are a number of things he could have done to accommodate me. And all he said was, get out of my office, essentially. He didn't say that, but that was the message. I'm not doing anything for you. So you have to make accommodations for anybody with a disability. And in this case, it's entirely possible to do that at really zero risk to the doctor.
Well, we thank you, Mark, for bringing the case, for standing up for yourself and for all people with HIV. And just thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank the two of you for doing this, by the way, every week. I'm a big fan of your show, and I'm very honored to be on it.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, thanks, Mark. We'll see you again.
See you later.
Well, the Justice Department at least followed through on Mark's case, but they had to have a judge order them to stop trying to exclude people, transgender people, from the Affordable Care Act and being treated equally there. We won a federal case, our side won a federal case from a judge in Brooklyn, Judge Frederick Block, who said, the Supreme Court announces a major decision, as they did in the Bostock decision. It seems a sensible thing to pause and reflect on the decision's impact. Since the Department of Health and Human Services has been unwilling to take that path voluntarily, the court now imposes it.
So this HHS, Health and Human Services rule was about to go into effect, withdrawing protections for trans people in healthcare. And the judge stepped in the nick of time and issued an injunction against the rule going into effect. While the rule is under attack by activists who filed suit against it, and while that plays out, the injunction is in place.
And the suit was filed by Tanya Walker, who we've interviewed before on this program, and Cecilia Gentili as complainants in the case. These are transgender activists who were, going to be denied health care under the ACA, or at least equal access to it as themselves. So congratulations to Tanya and Cecilia. And I believe the Human Rights Campaign played a role in bringing this suit.
Yes, I think they were involved. And does this take us to Louisiana and Texas?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, it's not the same thing, but along the same lines. A married lesbian, Ashley Langlinay, was the basketball coach at Austin, Texas Catholic School. She was fired by she was complaining about a priest at the school who made racist and homophobic remarks. And she then gathered petition signatures to take to the bishop to complain about this guy. And she got fired for having tried to act against a racist, homophobic bishop. So she, and we have a picture of her delivering the petitions, she took 12,000 signatures to the Lafayette, Louisiana bishop to complain about both her firing and this priest who was. And
in Idaho, the U.S. District Court, we still get some justice from the courts, has granted an injunction against the enforcement of the anti-transgender law there. The court said it was an invalid interest of excluding trans women and girls from women's sports entirely.
We told you last week that the courts had allowed a gay couple who had a daughter born to a surrogate in Canada, and the government was against recognizing the citizenship of the daughter. It's complicated, but it boils down to them not recognizing the very legal marriage of these two men. So the court gave a good decision affirming the citizenship of this daughter. Well, the State Department is now appealing that order, and they just will not back down on this stuff. They are going after every single bit they can.
As we move into talking about politics and the Democratic Convention and all that kind of stuff, I just want to remind people, it's not just the presidency, not enough just to elect a president and a House and even the Senate, which we of course need, but most state legislatures, 60% of state legislatures are in Republican hands. And they draw the lines for themselves and for the U.S. House. And we overcame some of these bad lines in Virginia and, elected an awful lot of people in the state legislature there. New York State did it in our state Senate. But this is why your local state legislative elections are so important this year. And it's hard because we're still running on the lines that the Republicans drew in many cases.
Well, it's also why it's important to fill out the census, because that's how that's how representatives to Congress are allocated on the basis of the populations of the various states.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the Democratic convention. Are you happy with what you've seen so far as we report?
I basically am. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of Republicans. I hope they don't hire for the new administration. But, it was great to see glimpses, at least, of Danica Rome, the transgender state legislator from Virginia. Megan Rapinoe with her purple hair. And
Rapinoe.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rapinoe. Been a while since we spoke about it. Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago. Now, Billy Porter sang an anti-war anthem from the 1960s, For What It's Worth, accompanied by Stephen Stills, but it had to be on like C-SPAN to see it. I'm going to send it out with the email.
Oh, good, because it's one of my favorite songs.
It's great. But then there was, in the what they're calling the keynote, out Mayor Robert Garcia of Long Beach, Georgia Representative Sam Park, Pennsylvania Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, and his husband. It was clear that these people were gay. They spoke about it in their little short presentations.
Well, some of them did, not all of them. Danica Rome was not identified as trans. Megan Rapinoe didn't talk about being a lesbian.
Purple hair.
Well, whatever. No, what was really nice was, but that's my concern. There were a lot of us there. It
was produced by Joe Salmonese, the former head of the Human Rights Campaign.
The convention secretary, who was in charge of the roll call, Jason Ray, is gay.
I thought that the roll call was quite charming.
I love the roll call. Craig Hickman, another state rep. And Kristen Urquizo, the young woman who talked about her father dying of COVID. She's a lesbian. And in some of the pictures that ran as she talked, you saw her with her partner and her mother and father. But again, not mentioned.
She gave the only quote we're going to remember from the entire convention. That, my father, who died at the age of 65, had no underlying health conditions except trusting Donald Trump. It was piercing. It was that one line that she got. It was just, and of course was repeated constantly. Did he tweet about that?
And I appreciated the racial diversity of the LGBTQ people who were featured. Black, Asian, Latinx, white, across the board. Very, very great. Craig Hickman, I think, was the guy from Maine who gave the votes and talked about his husband and he farming in Maine. Really nice variety of people across the board for the whole convention. And that is the message that I keep seeing. And as people say, the real people.
The real America.
Far less of the boring politicians' speeches and much more of the real people, both in the keynote and the roll call Tuesday night. Those were my favorite parts so far, both of them. And I thought they did a spectacular job of putting those together.
We're taping on Wednesday afternoon. We're going to hear from Kamala Harris tonight. I do have a correction on her. I said her grandfather was a freedom fighter against the British. He was a bureaucrat in the British colonial government, but he did work for the new Indian government for decades, and he was quite progressive, and he emphasized education for his daughter, who was Kamala's mother.
And we have a picture of her new chief of staff, the out lesbian Karine Jean-Pierre, and her girlfriend, Suzanne Malveaux, the CNN.
Together, and there they are.
Yeah, exactly. So nice to see them out loud and proud.
Okay. Some other political news. Let's talk about that congressional race in Massachusetts. Wow, it's become quite the scandal.
Yes.
Last week, we reported that Alex Morse, the out-gay mayor of Holyoke, Massachusetts, is running against Richie Neal, who is only the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. That the stuff was leaked about, alleged inappropriate stuff with students and sex and Grindr and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's a smear campaign being conducted by this group, College Democrats, where the leaders of College Democrats want to get jobs with Richie Neal, and they cooked this thing up. But they cooked it up with leaders of the Massachusetts Democratic Party, the top leaders of the party. Even James Roosevelt helped write their letter. He's the grandson of FDR and his lesbian, grandmother Eleanor, for God's sakes. So it's, and Richie Neal, during the debate that they had, is sort of feeding into it. Well, I think these students should be heard. They're not saying anything. Nobody's complaining about him.
And they talk about, Neal and his cohorts talk about, oh, these students were so brave to come forward and speak up. There are 3 people, and they're all in this little cohort of plotters who were trying to take down Alex Morse.
And it's an outrage. They're smearing. They trumped up a front group called A Case for Women, raising issues about Alex Morse's predatory behavior, putting those things online. There was a poll that asked voters, would you support Morse if he sent sexually explicit emails to college students?
Charming. Push polls.
Push poll. Outrageous. Well, the primary is September 1st. You have a chance to send a message to Richie Neal, who is basically, not even, although he's chair of Ways and Means, has not been a very visible congressman. And has been there forever. So,
Well, my impression is that he started out as a good progressive, but that was 30 years ago. And now he's the chair of Ways and Means. And he is, because he holds that seat, he is the most funded member of Congress by corporate PACs and lobby groups.
This has been in and around Springfield, Massachusetts. So let's see if another insurgent can win. Alex Morse.
In the face of the most virulent and disgusting campaign. It could be an indication of his potential strength in this election if they're going after him so hard and so badly.
Better news from Florida.
Okay.
Where Chevron Jones, the first black gay man, was elected to the state Senate. He, by the way, was rejected as a plasma donor, and this was a big story. Although now we're hearing that plasma may not be helping people, we don't know. There's not enough evidence on it. And then Michelle Rayner is the first black queer woman elected to the state house in Florida. So there were some breakthroughs there, and some homophobes lost.
Now, I know they're being referred to as being elected, but wasn't this a primary? Is it that they don't have opponents in the general election? Because they don't hold general elections in August, to the best of my knowledge.
And in New York, our state Senator Brad Holman has announced that he's running for borough president of Manhattan next year. He's an out gay candidate. We know him well.
He's done a lot of good work in the state legislature, but it's going to be a crowded field, I think, in that race.
To succeed Gail Brewer, who was terrific.
Term limited. So in Vermont, trans woman Taylor Small won her primary for the state house. And in Wisconsin, trans woman Jessica Katzenmeier won her primary for the state assembly.
In North Carolina, that Republican Madison Hawthorne, who's only 25 years old, is running for the Congress now, Republican candidate in a Republican district, posted pictures of himself he's in a wheelchair, wheeling around and laughing at the eagle's nest of Adolf Hitler in Germany. He tried to say, well, he was a supreme evil, but he called him the Fuhrer. And this has caused a bit of a furor. And now, this week, a woman has come forward to accuse him of sexual assault. He apologized for this. And he lied about being admitted to the Naval Academy. So his Democratic opponent there is Mo Davis.
And in other Nazi news, Amazon has finally banned Scott Lively's book, The Pink Swastika.
Yeah, but they're selling selling T-shirts like, Biden and the Ho, all this kind of stuff, which is being trumped up by the right wing.
Yeah.
In Central Virginia, Republican Bob Good, who knocked off Republican Denver Riggleman, because Riggleman had performed a same-sex marriage ceremony in a Republican primary, is now running against a Democrat named Cameron Webb on a platform of opposing same-sex marriage, which is the law, and trans rights. He is a former fundraiser at Liberty University. He won't disavow his surrogate, Eddie Dean, who calls racial minorities the devil and LGBTQ people queers, not in a good way. So bad, bad, bad.
It's a mess out there, and the post office doesn't help. And meanwhile, Trump is pardoning Susan B. Anthony. A, does he know she's a lesbian? And B, does he know that she didn't want to be pardoned because she saw her conviction for voting as a badge of honor?
He's pardoning people who committed voter fraud in 1872.
Yes.
What kind of example is he trying to set?
Exactly.
He also appointed anti-LGBT activist J. Christian Adams to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Now, the president picks 4 for 6-year terms. The other 4 are picked by Congress. Adams mocked a Justice Department attorney for being a member of gay law. His book attacked Obama for protecting trans youth, and he promoted Islamophobia. He knocked even having LGBT pride at the Justice Department. What a piece of work.
But the Equal Opportunity Commission in Nebraska will investigate complaints of housing discrimination related to sexual orientation or gender identity per the Bostock decision. Because the Nebraska law, human rights law, forbids sex discrimination. And so unlike the Trump administration, the Human Rights Commission looked at the Equal Opportunity Commission said, hey, we have a law against sex discrimination, and the Supreme Court says we should interpret that broadly to include LGBT people. So we're announcing that we're going to be open to those complaints.
Now, Senator Jeanne Shaheen is doing pretty well in the polls against possible Republican opponents, but one of them running for the U.S. Senate there did an attack ad condemning liberal socialist pansies. It says this right on the ad. He's in the primary.
Yeah, I watched the ad. It's only 15 seconds. He doesn't look like a winner against Jeanne Shaheen. In Louisville, Kentucky, a Trump-appointed judge ruled for the photographer who filed the anticipatory lawsuit saying that she doesn't want to be forced to shoot same-sex weddings. She hasn't been asked to shoot any same-sex weddings, but the judge agreed with her that she shouldn't have to. The judge said photography is an art, and art is protected by First Amendment speech. There is room for all.
And in Detroit, the Black lesbian-owned bakery there did make a cake for an anti-gay fundamentalist Christian, but wouldn't write his message, which was homosexual acts are gravely evil, citing the Catholic Catechism. He didn't pick up the cake, but he's now suing anyway. The ACLU says he has no case. The Archdiocese is disavowing him. Oprah Winfrey is a fan of the Good Cakes and Bakes shop.
In California, the release of the Prop 8 trial videos has been delayed while the right wing appeals the order to release them to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
In Arizona, trans teens have filed a class action suit over Arizona banning surgery and Medicaid for transgender folks. It's a National Center for Lesbian Rights case.
And in the Bronx, New York, the district attorney there has announced she will not indict 2 cops who tased and shot dead a gay man, Kowalski Treywick, 32 years old. He's living with mental illness. He was in an apartment for people who need assistance. He'd been locked out. So he called the fire department and they came and let him in. But meanwhile, the cops came, and when they arrived, he was already back in the apartment and he was cooking. And he had a knife in his hand because he was cooking, and they tased him and shot him dead. And the DA will not indict them.
Well, also in the Bronx, in the murder of Dior Ova, or also known as Tiffany Harris, trans woman, July 26th, the police did arrest Alpha Diallo, 21, who apparently is a schizophrenic who hears voices and blah, blah, blah. stopped his medication during the pandemic and went on to kill. There was a vigil held for Ova last week.
Well, mental illness and people on the street with mental illness is a real problem, and society has not figured out how to deal with this yet.
By the way, everybody keeps calling me from outside of New York thinking I'm going to get stabbed or shot if I go out. Please, I mean, there's a little uptick in crime. We've at least gotten the virus somewhat under control, knock wood, here in New York. You're in a lot more trouble if you're not in New York.
I agree, but I'm not counting my chickens yet. We have a long way to go.
Yes, we do. Of course, we continue to take every precaution.
Yeah, we told you last week about Newark, New Jersey, the death of Ashley Moore, a trans woman, 26 years old, and the fact that the police and other authorities had completely refused to look into this. They are now going to open a new investigation, and we have a local news report talking about what's going on with Ashley Moore in Newark.
Prosecutors only agreed to take a second look at Ashley Moore's case after outrage from activists and the outcry of a grieving mother. Today, Pix 11 was the only station there as they were called to City Hall for a critical update.
Hey guys, it's Ashley.
Ashley's mother found out her child was dead on social media when she went to post a birthday wish for her.
It's been 4 months and 2 weeks since the death of Ashley Moore, a black transgender woman in Newark. Moore's mother and the Newark LGBT Community Center have been on a frantic search for answers.
The questions came because we didn't know anything.
The 26-year-old was found lifeless near this Newark YMCA. Moore's mother told Pix 11 by phone today after learning of her daughter's death 8 days later on Facebook. Police then told her Ashley's death was a suicide, but the details did not add up.
I don't think Ashley was seen, valued enough for them to make a really concerted effort to investigate.
Concern was heightened because Ashley was the victim of a robbery 2 years ago.
I called the police and was denied any service because of me identifying as trans female.
To press Newark Police and City Hall for more information, activists took to social media.
The Justice for Ashley Moore campaign was started only a week or two ago, and it's taken on a lot of traction.
Today, Pix 11 was outside City Hall as the Newark LGBT Community Center director had a closed-door meeting with the mayor.
They acknowledged the fact that the family was disrespected.
Advocates now have more of the difficult, sensitive answers they were seeking into Ashley's death and a renewed purpose to bring change in Newark in honor of Ashley.
We need a special tip line for LGBTQ people to call in when the police are unresponsive to their needs.
Newark's mayor has now offered his condolences to Ashley Moore's family, and he has a promise for the city: transparency and a full review into the Newark Police Department's response into Ashley Moore's death. Reporting from Newark, Ayana Harris.
Another example that activism gets action, standing up for others, just as Mark did, as these folks did. That's how you get action.
And a couple of activist events coming up in the next few days. This Friday, the 21st at 6 p.m., a March for the Dead, Fight for the Living event, marching from the Brooklyn Bridge at 6 p.m. to the Trump building at 40 Wall Street to, of course, raise issues around Trump and his administration. And I think it's an anniversary, which I can't remember.
And then on Monday, August 24th at 4 o'clock, folks are going to meet for a Black Pride March honoring Bayard Rustin, who died in 1987, the great civil rights leader. You saw him on a lot of the pictures with John Lewis. Headed to the Stonewall from Brooklyn and ending up at the Christopher Street Pier for the 75th birthday celebration of Marsha P. Johnson.
Yes. And the event on the pier will actually start a little earlier and be ongoing. So you can go directly to the pier or you can participate in the march.
What time can we go to the pier?
Oh, I was afraid you'd ask me that.
Right. We'll figure it out. We'll put it in the email.
Okay. And we mourn the death of Emmy-winning producer Ash Christian, 35 years old, gay man, died in his sleep on vacation in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. He has an amazing resume of TV shows, films, Broadway, for someone who was only 35.
Starting with the movie Fat Girls in 2006, where he won the Outstanding Emerging Talent Award at the LA Outfest.
Yeah, no explanation of his death yet, but we'll keep an eye on that.
We will. Sad.
International news?
Yeah, I mentioned at the top of the show, this happened in Plymouth, England. A father gave his 15-year-old son 20 lashes using a cable after seeing him on Grindr. He was given 18 months in prison. In his defense, he said he wasn't mad at his son for being bisexual, but for posting pictures of himself on Grindr. But evidence was given that he shouted at his son, "You were gay, you are a woman. What's that between your legs?" Oh, boy. So the judge called it a cruel and brutal punishment and sentenced him to prison, and they're not talking.
Wow. In Poland, the fight over LGBT rights continues. There was a confrontation this last weekend between crowds of far-right demonstrators and LGBT demonstrators in the street. A clash, nothing terrible about violence or arrests, but the fight is continuing. No one is backing down on this one.
Well, and Poland is threatening to challenge in court the EU's decision to withhold funds to towns that declared themselves LGBT-free zones. The government had the nerve to say there was no policy or regulation restricting the civil rights of people of different sexual orientations in Poland.
And China, of course, the authorities there are continuing to crack down, and they have now succeeded in getting Shanghai Pride to cancel itself. It had been going since 2009, and they say the pressure from authorities is just too much now, and they're closing down Shanghai Pride for the moment.
In Hungary, the U.S. Embassy warned that neo-Nazi groups, or said that should not be tolerated after 2 rainbow flags were torn down from municipal buildings. Now, the Budapest City Hall had put them up because I guess there's some liberal pockets there, and they were torn down and burned by a hardcore soccer fan. 25 embassies marked the 25th anniversary of Pride there, so there's some rays of light in Hungary, even from the United States.
Look, it's mixed everywhere. It's a battle that's going on. In Australia, Queensland became the first state of the country to outlaw conversion therapy, but activists are not happy about it because they say it doesn't cover religious programs of conversion therapy, and therefore they consider it inadequate.
Well, I mean, again, you can only really ban it if people are getting third-party reimbursement in this country, if you're trying to do it.
Well, this is Australia. I don't know what the rules are there, but that's...
down under, they do everything different.
Backwards.
Yes, I know. All right.
In Baja California, Mexico, and Sonora, they are still trying to pass marriage equality in the legislature or through lawsuits. That's an ongoing battle.
Okay, we're down to our last 4.5 minutes.
I want to recommend a new documentary, Cured, which will play at the LA Outfest next week. If for once you can attend a film festival online. So Cured is about attempts at conversion therapy. And the big fight over having the American Psychiatric Association drop its condemnation of homosexuality as a mental disorder. It's fascinating. It has amazing historic footage in it, and stuff you may know, but this is expanded amazingly in this documentary.
It was a big fight, but it happened pretty fast once activists got going.
Well, it took a couple of years, but they did it, and it's a pretty amazing win. This documentary will air on PBS next year, but if you want to see it now, go to the Outfest LA Festival and sign up to see Cured online.
It was amazing. My friend George Weinberg, who was a psychotherapist, said, yeah, they all voted to get rid of the index, out of the index of mental disorders, but they still thought you were sick.
Well, Socarides features prominently.
Oh, my God. All right. Well, anything to say about Ellen?
They fired 3 producers who worked on both her talk show and her Game of Games show in the prime time. I don't know, you know.
Portia says, I stand by Ellen. That's Ellen's wife.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about Disney's animated Owl House series. It stars an out bisexual girl, Liz Noceda, a 14-year-old Dominican-American, no less. Luz tries to become a witch after stumbling on a portal to another world instead of
Do we need the whole
well, I mean, it's fascinating. Well, I'm giving it to you because we're going to show you what Franklin Graham thought about it. She befriends a witch, blah 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 blah, but she's bi. And let's show the clip of how Franklin Graham reacted to this.
Welcome back to Washington for this CBN News break. Evangelist Franklin Graham and other conservatives are calling on parents to boycott Disney's LGBTQ agenda. He says Disney has the right to make their cartoons, but Christians also have the right to not support them. The latest LGBTQ character is in the lead role of a show on the Disney Channel. The Owl House is about a bisexual teenager exploring her sexuality and dabbling in witchcraft. 14-year-old character has shown affection for male characters in previous episodes, but begins to explore the idea of a relationship with a female.
I like the fact that the character is 14 and out bisexual. The creator, Dana Terrace, who is also bisexual, says she had to really fight with Disney about this. They did not want it.
Well, and the creator of Disney's Gravity Falls from 2012 to 16 says that Disney expressly forbade him from creating LGBTQ characters. So this is a breakthrough.
Definitely. How much time do we have, Andy?
We're down to 1 minute and 14 seconds.
All right. Jared Leto is expected to be hired to play Andy Warhol. This is ridiculous. They're going to make a film about Andy Warhol's life. And Jared Leto, who won an Oscar for playing an HIV-positive trans woman in Dallas Buyers Club, is supposedly
not stealing our roles.
And you may remember he was a little controversial for not mentioning trans people in his Oscar speech.
Well, trans people are being successful in getting you to stop taking their roles.
I suspect he's not going to get this, but you can check me later. And Shia LaBeouf is supposed to play a gay Iceman character in the new X-Men film. What's wrong with these people?
Shia LaBeouf, he's lucky to get work. Thanks for being with us. We're down to our last 10 seconds. It's good to see you, Ann.
Good to see you, Andy, and good to see all of you, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.